And if there is any statin police out there, I want to make a disclosure that I am not giving individual medical advice. Occasionally, I do prescribe statins. You have seen this slide before. Fat and cholesterol are waxy substances. They do not dissolve in blood. Our blood is aqueous or watery, and in order to carry cholesterol, it creates these lipoprotein particles that have an outer coat that dissolves in blood, and they have identifying proteins that give it a functionality. So I wanted to go over what functions the lipoproteins do, and I thought one slide would be enough. But what we need to recognize is that there is millions of years of evolutionary engineering behind creating these molecules so that they help us with host defense. They fight bacteria. They mop up bacterial products. They modulate inflammation. Cholesterol is not a metabolic fuel. You cannot burn it, and it has to be removed, and it's removed in the biliary tree. It's the lipoproteins that create a cholesterol balance. When your cells are damaged, cells need to be repaired, and it's the lipoprotein molecules that do that. So I thought one slide would be enough, but it was not. So I had to create a second slide to show that the cholesterol is important in processing or functionality of your insulin receptor depends on cholesterol, because cholesterol-rich domains give it the structure it needs to function. Our sex hormones, the LDL supplies the raw materials for the sex hormones to be made. It's a carrier for fat-soluble vitamins. Dave Feldman has talked about energy delivery. It is the lipoprotein molecules that deliver energy. The CoQ10, which is an important part of our muscle function, is delivered through the lipoproteins. And who knew that prevention of vascular calcification that Jeff was talking about is also modulated because cholesterol is involved in converting vitamin K1 to K2, which prevents vascular calcification. So the question we should ask is that, should I tamper with these lipoproteins in general, or LDL in particular, when millions of years of evolutionary engineering has given it so many different biologic functions that I have pointed out? And this list by no means is complete. What we need to recognize is that nature has already done some of this for us, and it has created a situation which is called A-beta lipoproteinemia, in which the LDL is absent. So we should think that a person with an absent LDL should live forever. So when we look at a group of these individuals, let's see what happens. They have a failure to thrive, they get recurrent infections, they get blindness, they get issues with regards to their neuromuscular function. In other words, movement disorders. They get a fatty liver, and instead of living forever, they die in their third or fourth decade. The reason is that the lipoprotein molecules are important in supplying cholesterol to your nerves, in carrying fat-soluble vitamins, in fighting infections. But as it so happens, we don't want to learn from nature's mistakes. We want to do our own. And that's why we started this era of statins and a new drug which is called PCSK9, and hopefully I'll have time to get into that. Now, cholesterol is vitally important for us. if you ate no cholesterol and you became a complete vegan, your body will still make 3,000 milligrams of cholesterol every day. 3 grams, 3,000 milligrams. There's a synthetic machinery that our body has to make cholesterol, and while it's making cholesterol, it also makes certain very important molecules that have biologic function. Now, statins prevent cholesterol production very high up in the chain of this cascade. So what we noticed is that isopentenyl is making us certain proteins called selenoproteins that give us antioxidant protection. It's converting vitamin K1 to K2 that prevents vascular calcification. CoQ10 is important because it helps muscle function. Dolicol, which is a cholesterol precursor, is helping us process the insulin receptor, and cholesterol itself is involved in giving the membrane the integrity that it needs. So I have been accused of being very nerdy, and that was quite nerdy. So how do I unpack this? How do I be redundant? So to reiterate, the isopentenyl is involved in creating certain antioxidative enzymes that prevent free radical damage, that the isopentenyl converts K1 to K2 so that vascular calcification is prevented, that CoQ10 is involved in muscle function, that dolicol is processing the insulin receptor, and cholesterol itself is providing certain cholesterol-rich domains so that receptors can function. And here is an example of an insulin receptor. The insulin receptor sits in caveolae, which is a cholesterol-rich domain. And in that cholesterol-rich domain, the receptor functions well because it has the structural integrity. When you remove the cholesterol, the insulin receptor does not function well, as we shall see later. Now, we talked about dolicol as a precursor for cholesterol production, and dolicol is involved. It takes the protein manufacturing machinery of the body, and in that location where the insulin receptor is being made, it attaches a sugar residue so that the receptor can function well. So cholesterol is involved in every step of the way for processing of the insulin receptor. At the level of the membrane, it sits in a cholesterol-rich domain. The sugar residue is through dolicol, a cholesterol intermediate, and the pore through which, the channel through which the body takes in sugar, the GLUT4 channel, is also processed through the selenoproteins made by cholesterol. And the clinical relevance to this is coming from the Women's Health Initiative study. 10,000 of these women were on statins, 140 were not. What happened? The women that were on statins, 3 years later, the chances of them being a diabetic was a little close to 10% compared to 6% in women not taking statins, a 3.5% difference. If you were a Hispanic, you are more susceptible to statin damage, and the difference was not 3.5%, it was 5%. If you were an Asian like me, the difference was not 3.5%, it was 7%. Now, we've talked about CoQ10 a lot. The way I talk about CoQ10 is that it is the spark plug of an engine. If the engine doesn't have spark plug, it cannot burn fuel. Similarly, if our mitochondria don't have CoQ10, they cannot create usable energy, which is called ATP, and CoQ10 is a cholesterol byproduct. So my fellow Texan, Dr. Lance Joan, took 10 patients who were on statins, he did muscle biopsies, he did blood work, and he compared them to 9 matched controls. And out in the blue line, what you're seeing is how the matched controls performed. And compared to that blue line, the people who were on statins had higher blood pressure, higher sugars, they had lower CoQ10 in their muscles, they made less enzymes that prevented oxidative damage or free radical damage. They were not able to generate the energy currency because they didn't have CoQ10, and they were insulin resistant. So Dr. Lansdowne took 328 patients that presented to his office and were on statins, and he found that 50 of these patients complained that they were having myalgias, that they were fatigued, that they were having shortness of breath, that they were having memory issues. And he stopped their statins, and when he stopped their statins, majority of them improved. In 28 of these patients, they had heart muscle dysfunction that he evaluated with an ultrasound of the heart called an echocardiogram. When he stopped the statins, 50% of these individuals improved. The other 50% did not improve, which means that statins, cessation of statins may not lead to improvement in everyone. So this is something that was not good information for the statin industry. And what they did is to say, hey, let's go on a fence and say that using statins will prevent mortality in people who have congestive heart failure. Heart failure is a situation in which the heart muscle is not pumping well. So what they did is to compare people who had heart failure who were on statins compared to who were not on statins. And this is an unfair comparison, because if you bring me a patient with heart failure and they have high cholesterol, I know they're going to live forever. A proper way to compare is to see the group of people who are on statins, if they are taking statins less frequently, in the middle, or taking it more than 75% of the time, who does better? And that's the comparison I did. So if you were taking statins less frequently, you were less likely to die. In fact, the highest mortality was there in the group that took the statins most of the time. Not just all-cause mortality, you were at greater risk of strokes, you were at greater risks of getting heart attacks. In Japan, the Japanese Society of Cardiology said that everybody with a cholesterol over 220 should get a statin. So this is 41,000 patients who are on statins, and as they take statins, their cholesterol levels are reducing. So you would expect that if your cholesterol level is coming down, you should be at lower risk of dying. But as you can see on the graph, the lower your cholesterol, greater the risk of all-cause mortality, the greater the risks of cancers, the greater the risks of strokes. How does that make sense? Now, in that same study, we evaluated the number of diabetics. So you would think that if statins are good for you, as you reduce the cholesterol, you should have a lower incidence of diabetes. But as you can see, as the cholesterol got reduced by the use of simvastatin, that was the group that had the highest risk of being a diabetic. Now, we said that the cholesterol intermediates are involved in preventing oxidative injury because the prenyl intermediates take the protein manufacturing machinery that we have and create selenoproteins that prevent oxidative damage. They also make some DNA repair enzymes that prevents injury to our cells so that we don't get cancers. So this is the function of the cholesterol intermediates. So again, the deception from the statin industry and the statin experts is that let's go on a fence and say that statin use is associated with a reduced chance of having mortality if you have cancers. So they took a Danish population, 40 years and older, all of them had cancers, and they're comparing people who are not on statins to people who are on statins. Again, this is an unfair comparison. The reason is that if you have high cholesterol and you have cancers, you have a better chance of survival. And you would give cholesterol reducing medicines only to somebody who has high cholesterol, not to somebody who has low cholesterol. So similarly, the comparison should be that somebody on low dose, middle dose, and high dose, if cholesterol is beneficial in preventing them from dying, the higher the cholesterol, the higher the statin dose, the lower should be your mortality. But not so. In this study, if you were on the highest dose of cholesterol, you had a much greater chance of all-cause mortality and also of cancer mortality compared to the low-dose cholesterol group. This is a study done in patients 65 years and older, called an older population, and I looked at that and I said, what do you mean, 65 is old? But anyway, there were 3,000 patients in each group. The pravastatin use reduced cholesterol by roughly 33%. They were followed for 3 years. What happened? The people on pravastatin had 50 more cancers approximately. It was statistically significant. And the cholesterol converts vitamin K1 to K2, the prenyl intermediates, and they activate an enzyme that prevents calcium deposition in the blood vessels of the heart. So this is a VA study, and the VA study was done in patients who were on statins not using frequently versus those who were using frequently. When you see the people who were using statins a lot, they had more calcification. When they were followed at 4.3 years, the progression of calcium was highest in the people using statins compared to the people who were not. This is another compelling information. You take smooth muscle cells. These are cells that line the wall of the vessel, and you grow them in a culture dish, and you give them increasing amounts of the statin drug. And what you're finding on the slide to the left of the screen here is that as the dose of statin increased, more cells were dying. Now, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and in this picture, the arrows are pointing to the effects of statins that are killing the smooth muscle cells. So here is a cell that is undergoing repair, and as it undergoes repair, it puts cholesterol out into the milieu. The HDL, which looks discoid in the beginning, is there to pick up the cholesterol. It becomes spherical. And then it does this amazing thing. It transfers the cholesterol from HDL to LDL. The LDL takes the cholesterol. It is then subsequently removed by the liver through the LDL receptor. And the liver recycles the cholesterol and the protein. This is an important biologic function. But if you prevent that transfer, which is happening through the CETP enzyme, you create something that medical professionals like a lot. You are increasing your HDL, you are reducing your LDL. So that's what happened in this study. So this is an Illuminate trial, about 7,500 patients in each group. The group to the left, the HDL, which is the good cholesterol, is very high, 83. The LDL is very low. A cardiologist like me would salivate over this, say, this is so good. Why are you even coming to see me? You don't need to come see me because you're going to live forever. What happened in this study? With high HDL and low LDL, more people died, more people had cancer mortality, more were hospitalized for heart failure, more had infections, and more had strokes. So this is where I want to tell you how an industry-sponsored clinical trial is done. 95% of studies that are done on statins are sponsored by the industry. And the industry plays the clinical side, which is at the top of the slide. About 400 sites in about 25 countries is a blockbuster study. Physicians like me at the site are paid by the industry. The industry hires a team of experts called CAC, Central Adjudicating Committee. They are paid by the pharmaceutical industry. They hire a DSM, a Data Safety and Monitoring Committee, that's designed to protect the patient. Who pays them? It's the pharmaceutical industry. The FDA, which is to approve new drugs, a substantial portion of their budget comes from the pharmaceutical industry. There's a revolving door between pharmaceutical industry and FDA. You would think that medical journals that take these blockbuster studies that are going to make mega profit for the industry, are they conflicted? Yes, they are, because when a blockbuster study is published, millions of reprints are ordered that is extremely beneficial for the statin industry and for the medical journals. You would think that American Heart Association and ACC are not conflicted, but just go to one of their meetings and see the dominance of the industry. A large portion of their budget comes from them. You would think that physicians like me are not conflicted, but they'll come and say, Dr. Ali, we think that you are a pretty good opinion leader in your community. You can speak. Why don't we give you about $3,000 5 nights a month? And why don't you go and tell your friends and your community that this is a good drug, please use it. I urge you to go to propublica.com, put the names of the physicians. You'll be shocked to see that some physicians are earning between $100,000 to $500,000 a year speaking for the industry and promoting their drugs. So let's say that the pharmaceutical industry, the doctors who have done the study are completely ethical, they are above board, they have done nothing wrong, that the data is robust. And you say, come and show me the best study you have done that shows that statin is beneficial. You got to go back to 1994, the Forest trial, about 4,000 plus patients in Scandinavia, half of them given simvastatin, half of them not given simvastatin. At the end of 5 years, the reduction in mortality was 0.6% per year. That is the most robust endpoint, mortality. 0.6% per year. Okay? Now, it would be honorable for the doctors and the pharmaceutical industry to say, yes, this is our result, but they pointed saying that there was a 42% reduction in mortality. Now, I borrowed these slides from Malcolm Kendrick. I've used them before. I would appreciate that even if you have heard it before, that you laugh. Let's say the Colorado Lotto, if you buy a ticket, your chances of winning is 1 in 15 million. And I come and say, I'm an expert at predicting who will win. I'll increase your chances by winning by 50%. How much is that realistically? That is 1.5 in 15 million. So in absolute terms, that is 0.603. So if I were a pharmaceutical industry, I would sell my wares like this. Do you want to be a millionaire? Send me $50. I will increase your chances by 50%. This is no con trick. On the other hand, if I were being honest, this is what I would say, that the pathetic, desperate, lonely Dr. Ali can very minusculely increase your chances of winning the lotto. Please send me this much money. You get the point. So the truth is that you should always talk about absolute risk reduction, never relative risk reduction. So I don't want you to get bogged down by the slide. I took a lot of time to prepare it, and it has very useful information. So in the LDL reduction line, it's showing the degree of reduction in LDL over time from 1994 to 2017. And on the mortality benefit line is showing the degree of mortality benefit. So the FOREST trial, we've seen over 5 years, 3.3% reduction. But then 2004 was a landmark point in which the Vioxx trial came out. When the Vioxx trial was evaluated, it was found that Merck did data tampering, the same company that did the FOREST study. They also found that Merck hid the data that showed that these people were having heart attacks. What happened? 88,000 patients had a heart attack, roughly 40,000 patients died, and when it came to light, Merck paid $5 billion in damages. That's the first time that Congress put in guidelines that said that if you do a study, you need to publish it. Because before that, a company could do 10 different studies, hide the 9 and publish the one that showed benefit. Now, that's when scrutiny started. And if you look at the trial called the CARDS trial in diabetics, 33% reduction in cholesterol, 1.5% reduction in mortality. But that was before the clinical trial guidelines. A similar trial was conducted right after clinical trial guidelines, same group of diabetic patients, similar reduction in cholesterol, 0 reduction in mortality. The Jupiter trial, this trial reduced cholesterol by over 50%. The reduction in mortality was 0.5%. The Fourier trial that I will show you reduced cholesterol by almost 60%. It had 28,000 patients. There was a slight increase in mortality. So this is telling you what PCSK9 does, and I don't know if there are doctors in this audience, so I want to go over that. The PCSK9 comes in and tells the body that something is happening. Let's downregulate the LDL receptor. So let's remove the LDL receptor from the liver so that more LDL is there in the circulation. Why is it doing that? It's an acute phase reactant. In other words, if you have an infection, PCSK9 goes up. The LDL is there, as we have seen, to fight infections, to modulate inflammation, to do cell repair, and in a time of need, provide energy. But for whatever reason, the people want to use PCSK9 inhibitor to remove the PCSK9, and as the PCSK9 is removed, the LDL receptor is present on the liver and it mops up and takes away all the LDL. So the LDL levels go very low with PCSK9. And with more low LDL number, perhaps all the beneficial effects of what LDL is doing also go away. I refuse to call LDL the bad cholesterol. So what happened in this study? This is the study on PCSK9, 28,000 patients. They dropped the LDL cholesterol to 30 milligrams per deciliter. What happened? There were more deaths in the group that got the PCSK9. I would think that this is what you should say, that John Abrahamson said, dying of corrected cholesterol is not a successful outcome. PCSK9 was designed when humans were going through a nutrient-depleted environment. We had unpredictable fasting. It was designed so that you would have the ability to fight infections, that your body can be provided with energy. It also has many other functions that I will not get into. So the big pharma, the food industry, near 100% of cardiologists, the American Heart are telling us, eat a processed vegan diet, take statins, take PCSK9 inhibitors. They want to wipe the LDL and the PCSK9 out of our bodies. Should we do that? And I'm using a nice tagline from Dr. Mercola because he says, take control of your health. Do your own critical thinking. So when I prescribe a statin, I think that I need to discuss with the patient the risks and benefits. That's informed consent. Because should I view statins as mitochondrial toxins, something that affect memory and cognition, that cause vascular calcification, that cause insulin resistance, that promote oxidative injury, that damage your muscles, that most of the trials that have been done are conflicted by industry interest. So I'm going to use this and the next as my last slide. And I think that as a physician, I have a right to say this. I think that physicians have abdicated their clinical responsibility to their patients. They are looking to key opinion leaders, big pharma, food industry, various medical societies, and they are failing to talk to their patients. They have ceased their clinical thinking abilities. So I think we should accept some responsibility that this is right, that we are probably the first or the second leading cause of death in the US and worldwide.